Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with OLA. My name is Sandra Dunn. I'm Associate Director of OLA of Eastern Long Island. And OLA, for those of you who might not know, is OLA, and it stands for Organización Latinoamericana, or Latino American Organization. We are a Latino-focused advocacy organization based here on the East End. Thank you for being with us today. And I'm so happy to have our special guest today, Dr. Rene Va del Valle, who has a doctorate in social work from CUNY Graduate School and a master's in social work from Columbia University. He is also the author of a book that we'll be talking about today, Head, Heart, Crotch Connections, How Not to Fail in Search of Your Perfect Union. So we're thrilled to have you with us today, Rene. Thank you so much. And Rene is also a practicing psychotherapist here in East Hampton, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
At the East Hampton Family Medicine Clinic, which is part of the East Hampton Healthcare Foundation.
That's right,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And so for how long have you been practicing out here on
I've
the East
been
End?
working here for about the last 6 years
Mm-hmm.
with the medical practice. So for the most part, a lot of the clients that I see are referred by the medical doctors who feel they need some counseling, some help, some mental health support.
Great, great. And we know that bilingual licensed clinical psychologists are in short supply out here, so we're glad you're here. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about your book, but we a little bit later. But I did want to start off just with just learning a little bit about you. If you can just tell everybody
Sure.
about your background, how you came to this work, what made you want to be a psychotherapist.
Sure. Since you asked about my background,
Sure.
I was born in New York City, actually, in an area known as Spanish Harlem, on the east end of upper west side of Manhattan, raised in between Brooklyn and Queens, and for a while we moved to Puerto Rico to live there,
You're Puerto
because
Rican?
I'm of Puerto Rican and Dominican descent,
Mhm.
and I've lived primarily in Jackson Heights, which is a large Hispanic neighborhood.
Yes.
So I've been exposed to many of the other Latin American groups. And I came out here about 25 years ago
To the East End.
to the East End.
Mhm.
Originally, when I was out here, it was just on weekends, because I was living in the city and coming out here on weekends. But since I retired, which has been about for the last 10 years, it's the reverse. I'm living out here full time and go into the city on weekends.
Mhm, mhm. So you're retired, but you're still working.
Yes, I'm retired, but I'm still working part-time, what they call fee-for-service work.
Okay.
As a consultant to 3 different clinics.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so, how did you decide to become a psychotherapist? What inspired you to do that?
Well, when I went to Queens College, I had originally started as a bio pre-med major and loved it, but as I did a practicum, I saw that, because I wanted to be a pediatrician initially, and as I did my practicum, I saw children wounded and bleeding, and I actually almost fainted
Oh.
from the reaction of seeing children hurt. So I realized I couldn't be a pediatrician, couldn't work with suffering children, so I wanted to be then a child therapist and work with children. And that's how I entered the field, wanting to work more with their emotional issues rather than their physical disorders.
Oh, I see.
So I majored in psychology, especially in child psychology, and then I moved on to family therapy and adults and working with.
Great. So here in your practice in East Hampton, or even in your practice in New York City, when you've worked with immigrant clients, and I assume primarily Latino clients, right? People of
Yeah.
Latin American descent from different countries, what kinds of well, first of all, am I correct about that? And second of all, just what kinds of challenges or issues are you seeing come up for Latino members of our community out here especially?
Sure. Since I started working at the East Hampton Family Medicine Clinic, I work primarily, actually exclusively with the Spanish-speaking population, because there are other therapists who can work with the English-speaking. And when I joined them, I told them I just did want to work with just Spanish-speaking, because I realized that the paucity of professionals who spoke Spanish. When I started working with them, I realized that the vast majority of the difficulties or the problems that the Latinos were experiencing had to do a lot with assimilation and acculturation, and separation from their families, because many of them come here and leave families behind in their native countries. And the resulting difficulties that occur when there is that type of separation, especially when there's a reunification, when a lot of the families finally get to come to the United States, sometimes 10, 15 years later, and they've been separated from either their mother or their fathers, and the difficulty they experience in reuniting, because many times they feel like they're strangers to each other at that point.
Right.
You know.
So let's tease that apart a little bit, because
Sure.
I think it's, it's in what we see in our work with OLA as well. We see issues related to that as well, and certainly with young people, and we'll talk about los jóvenes or young people in a moment. But thinking about just the separation part of it, what kinds of challenge do you see people facing when they are here without their families? Because some people might think, oh, you just go to another country, you're without your family. I've lived without my family, one might say. And so what's the difficulty? What's the big deal?
Sure. Well, finding employment was often very difficult. The employment was seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
Finding places to live, because the Hamptons is very expensive.
Yes, impossible.
And once here, their sense of isolation, estrangement, loneliness, missing their families. When I first started, there wasn't, FaceTime and WhatsApp. So they couldn't visually see each other. Sometimes they were separated for long periods of time without visually seeing themselves and their families. With the development of these apps now, it's made it a little bit easier to tolerate the distance because you could see each other, But like I said before that, it was that sense of estrangement and loneliness. I was referred many times clients who had attempted suicide out of that sense of loneliness and depression that often came with being, an immigrant, with being alone.
Right. And so how do you find that people, I guess, I think everyone has the capacity for tremendous resilience, right? And how do you find that when people are going through something like that, the immigrant experience, and of course we all have a certain idea of what that immigrant experience is, but this is part of the immigrant experience, this isolation, this loneliness, this separation from family, separation from culture, separation from your language, when here on the East End we don't even have full language access in certain institutions, that we would like to see, where everything is done in both languages. But so what do you see there? I'm like, how do people, in your experience, how do people overcome these tremendous challenges and develop
Sure.
and exercise their resilience?
I think the resilience is developed through association, through social networking, through finding other people like themselves going through similar circumstances. So for the Latinos, a lot of it had to do with, for example, going to the churches, finding Latin churches out here where they could congregate and socialize and praise seemed to help them greatly. Going to local bars and restaurants where they would see other, Hispanics
Yes.
seemed to help them a lot.
Yes. Okay. So just eventually then building a community here.
The sense
right?
of a community,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the community that I work with lives, they're congregated for the most part up in the Springs.
Mhm.
And they've been able to purchase property and socialize in clubs and, places there. And that has helped them feel a sense of involvement in the community, commitment to the community, desire to stay here. The longer they are here, the more people they meet, the more relaxed they feel, the more accepted they feel by the community.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. And that can take sometimes years to build up, right? Years
Certainly
for
when I
this
first
process to
came here
happen.
25 years ago, I didn't see any of that. I would
Mhm.
say that it's been like within the last 10 years or so that you see those social networks building,
Mhm.
and that sense of community has enlarged.
Right. Right. And it, by the same token, it can take a long time for people to amass the capital to be able to
purchase
to buy a house, right? And we see so many people able to do that, and people who are not able to do that, and people who are getting pushed out of the Hamptons because there aren't enough rental properties available, and the few that there are, the rents are skyrocketing. So we see all of these issues. Almost every day we're getting calls from people saying, my landlord is trying to kick me out. So we make sure that they understand what is
Yeah, and the
legal
depression and
not
anxiety
legal.
associated with that.
Exactly.
Because a lot of them come to the clinic traumatized. They don't know how to manage these issues. They don't know who to go to, who to seek help from.
Right.
You know.
Right. So one thing that we do at OLA in terms of advocacy is we make sure that when people call us, that they understand their rights as tenants.
As tenants.
There was a wonderful tenant protection law passed in New York State in 2019, and what we're finding is that landlords either are not aware of it or are violating it. And that sometimes when landlords are doing illegal evictions, that they are not being prosecuted. Charges are not being brought against the landlord. So we're trying to make sure, to right that wrong and to make sure that people know their rights, that landlords know the law, and that town governments and police know that they are supposed to be bringing charges. But that's just one
Well, that's
challenge
been-
that people
yeah,
have.
Yeah. One of the
Mhm.
biggest challenges I noticed was the newly arrived learning the laws here.
Yes.
You know, and they would get involuntarily admitted or imprisoned because they weren't aware of the
Yes.
laws here.
Mhm.
You know, and that was a big challenge initially. Throughout the years, I think the word has spread what the laws are here and
Mhm.
how it can be different in Latin America than here.
Right.
And sometimes they've had to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Right.
And it's been very tragic and very sad for many.
Right, right,
Mhm.
yeah. So it's a process of educating community
Yes.
members,
Mhm.
but also a process of educating our elected officials, our police officers and
Police,
police
the
chiefs
firemen,
about
everybody, yeah.
what, about who Latino members of our community
Mhm.
are, and about certain challenges that they have and
Face.
such. So
Mhm.
yeah, and then you mentioned unification, the process of unification or reunification when other family members are able to come here, and that is beautiful, but it also poses its own set of challenges. So can you talk for a moment about
Sure.
that?
Some of the challenges are in relation to the person's feelings. They often felt they weren't taken into consideration, or they weren't even informed totally that their parents were leaving them behind, either
Yes.
leaving them with aunts or grandparents. Never explained to them if they would be coming back. So what you see is when they do arrive here, there's that difficulty in connecting, the estrangement between them, the feelings of resentment, which are
Yes.
often unconscious. They want to be able to be grateful, and they often voice saying, we're grateful that our parents came, sent us money, took care of us, was able to bring us to the United States, but unconsciously that feelings of abandonment and resentment come to the fore.
Mhm, mhm.
And initially it's all wonderful. Within a few weeks to a month, it starts to fall apart as genuine feelings come to the surface of
Right.
hurt, abandonment, resentment, anger.
Exactly.
And then they have to work through those feelings.
Mhm. So it sounds like you work with young people as well, with adolescents.
Well,
Mhm.
mostly, yes, adolescents and young adults mostly.
Mhm. Okay.
And
so
the families, because I do family work as well.
Right. So if you're working with the whole family, or even just with an adolescent or young adult, then they are sharing these experiences with you. And so what?
And the parental experience of having not been a parent for so long, feeling like they don't have the right to discipline their child
Yes.
at this point.
Or feeling guilty.
Or feeling guilty.
Mhm.
Massive amounts of guilt.
Yes,
and
exactly.
shame.
So how do people work through that with you?
Not easily. It takes a
It
long
does.
time sometimes
Mhm.
to work through those kinds of feelings.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's wonderful that some families and individuals have access to psychotherapy, to counselors, to family counseling or individual counseling. But as we know, as you well know, so many people do not have access because we don't have enough bilingual therapists here on the East End, bilingual counselors or psychotherapists, and sometimes also. We are well aware of this with OLA, and I think this is changing slowly, but there's still a stigma attached to seeking mental health care or emotional health care. People think, no, you just deal with your problems. I think this is not just in the Latino immigrant community, but also beyond, but maybe it's a bit more prevalent in the Latino community.
When I first started studying the utilization of services of mental health by Hispanics, which is what I did my doctorate in, I found out that there were reasons why they weren't utilizing the services. And there were a lot of theories that were postulated. One was called barrier theory, one was called alternate resources theory. Barriers being everything from institutional barriers to cultural barriers. The stigma associated with seeking mental health, language barriers, institutional barriers, the fact that a lot of the places didn't have Spanish-speaking staff. Some of the cultural belief systems that would be alternate to the mental health system, the belief in spiritualism, for example, and curanderia, folk healings. They would seek help among those resources before coming to the mental health system. So they would go often to priest or to extended family, because that's where you go first when you're experiencing some emotional distress. You don't go to traditional mental health services. That's not what the Hispanic community was used to. So those served as barriers to actually utilizing some of the mental health services. So sometimes you had to overcome those barriers to get clients to come in and utilize the service.
Yes, yes. And thank you for bringing up the very important issue of barriers. So I just want to share with everyone that one of the programs that we've started recently at OLA is called Youth Connect. And Youth Connect is a helpline. It's a text line and a phone line for adolescents who are struggling. They could be struggling because they're feeling too much school pressure and have a test tomorrow, or they could be struggling because they're having a really hard time with a parent, or they're struggling because they're thinking about committing suicide. So it can run the gamut. There's a whole spectrum of need. But we are in the schools with a team of trained crisis counselors giving presentations on Youth Connect so that local adolescents will understand that if they don't feel they can go to a parent or a priest or a school social worker, and most of our school social workers out here are not bilingual. Youth Connect is for everyone. We do the program in English and Spanish. It is available to all students, not just Latino students. But we want to make sure that it is also accessible to Latino students, which is why we provide the counseling in English or Spanish, whatever the student needs. But as you know,
one of the essential things to overcome barriers is to do outreach.
Exactly.
To provide information and referral, increase the social network abilities, and reach out to them so that they know what the services are.
Exactly.
And to make it available to them.
Right,
right. Accessible.
So then what happens is because teens prefer texting to calling, they will text and then a crisis counselor will engage in a brief text conversation with them to calm their fears or worries, whatever it might be. Or if it's a very serious life or death kind of situation, then we have a licensed clinical social worker who supervises our crisis counseling staff, and that gets referred to her. And then we will seek out help, and make referrals to local psychotherapists or nonprofits. So we have that because there needs to be this outreach. There needs to be something that's saying, you do not have to sit with this alone. There is someone you can talk to for 20 minutes. You can text with for 20 minutes. So I'm happy to hear the work you're doing as well with young people. So I'd like to turn now a little bit to your book. So again, this is Head, Heart, Crotch Connections. The title is quite bold, How Not to Fail in Search of Your Perfect Union. So this book is in English, and it's recently published. And one thing that I think is interesting here is that you talk about what many of us lament, which is this rise of social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, as the way that people communicate, and that we're communicating in sound bites and, sort of losing a deeper kind of connection. But I'll just say that, of course, we recognize what is positive about social media as well. And even a program like Youth Connect is using texts. It's little texts. It's not, but that you've, to some extent,
where they're at, in other words. In social work, we always believe
meet them where they are.
Meet them where they're at. Yes, exactly. So if that's what the medium they're using, texting, that's what you have to use.
Then that's the way we communicate.
No matter how
precisely.
limiting it may be, but it's also, it creates connection in some way. It can be
Yes.
very disconnecting, but it could also be connecting at the same time.
Exactly, exactly. I completely agree. So then thinking about more profound connections, you talk about three types of connection, and they're in the title of the book. So the heart connection, the head connection, and the crotch connection. So can you just very briefly talk about those, and then we'll expand on things?
Sure. The title of the book, Head, Heart, Crotch Connections, is really about mind, body, spirit connections. That was the paradigm that we knew before.
Yes.
I call the head, heart, crotch as a modern distillation of 21st century adaptation of that. But it really refers to the head, which is the thoughts, the heart, which is the feelings, and the crotch, which is the sexuality. Those are the three components, the areas that you explore when you explore how people are relating intimately. How are they sustaining attachments intellectually, emotionally, and sexually?
Yes, yes, exactly. And then the book is a wonderful book, and it's very practical, very useful, and just it serves as a very good guide, I think, for people who are trying to understand their relationships better or make their relationships better.
And then I titled it, subtitle, How Not to Fail.
Yes, talk
in
about
search
that.
of your perfect union, because as statistics show, most relationships, for example, first marriages, do not succeed. 50% of first marriages fail. 65% of second marriages fail.
That was an alarming
So-
statistic to me.
It
I knew the
is.
first one, but I didn't know the second one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So rather than talk about how to succeed, because there's lots of books out there on how to succeed, I wanted to do the inverse, to let people know, how do you not fail? How does disconnection result in failure? Not just how do you connect, because you have to know what's going wrong before you can know how to make it right.
Right.
So discussing disconnection and what
Mhm.
results in the demise of a relationship is as important as what results in the success of a relationship, and learning both aspects.
Mhm. So one thing that I thought was interesting, one path forward or key that you provide for readers are the 6 W's, and I'll just rattle them off right now. The 6 W's of connection: who, why, what, which, where, and when. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. In therapy, the way you connect or find out the nature of your connections is by asking yourself those questions. Who are you connecting to? Why are you connecting that person? In what way are you connecting? So when you explore those 6 W's, like I call it, which is the most important connection that you have? What is the order of your connection? That helps a person amplify and experience their connection in a way they didn't experience it before.
Mhm. So those struck me because I think we all understand that, of course, a key to success in a relationship is open communication, right? But that can feel pretty abstract. And what I like about these 6 W's is that you make communication very concrete.
Very concrete.
And although these 6 W's might seem simple, why, where, what, which, etc., when you ask those questions that seem simple, those questions lead to very deep understandings of yourself and of your partner. And then that, with that, at least this is how I read it, that's then how you can open up lines of communication that are very directed towards not failing, directed towards understanding one's needs better, one's partner's needs better, and you talk about the importance of empathy in a relationship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Intimacy is developed by your ability to empathize with your partner's needs. So you have to be able to understand or relate. It's called cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy means understanding your partner's thoughts, their values, their belief systems. Whether you agree, whether you find them pleasant, whether you find them agreeable, if you enjoy their thoughts. Then there's the emotional, affective empathy, whether you enjoy their emotional expression, whether you feel safe with their emotional expression, whether you admire their ability to express themselves emotionally with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, sexually, whether there is mutual gratification in the
Yes.
sexuality. And that's one of the variables that's most important to successful relationships. Not necessarily performance, but actually the aspect of mutual gratification.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have empathy in those three areas, when you can empathize with your partner's thoughts, their feelings, and their sexual needs, that is what comes together to create that, perfect union in a sense, if that's what you're looking for to create. But most important as well is not just knowing your connection to them, how they think, feel, and their sexuality, but their connection to you. That's often what's missing when people, because people are self-centered a little bit and they focus on their needs, and they fail to think about how are their partners relating to them? How do their partners feel about their thoughts,
Exactly.
their emotions, and their sexual desires? So it's the interactional nature, not just you about them, but them about you. What do they like about you? What do they admire? What do they respect? What do they not like about? What do they struggle with?
Yes.
You know.
Yes. Yeah. No, all of those things are so important. And having empathy, reminding people that empathy is really supposed to be at the core of our relationships, because we all get caught up in the day-to-day and in the stresses and the hassles and everything else, and then thinking back again to the experience of an immigrant couple or husband and wife reuniting. And things like that, then there are many layers there that need to be of just external pressures, I think, including poverty here on the East End, that people need to somehow put aside in order to be able to relate
Absolutely.
better with each
When
other.
we come back to that acculturation and assimilation issue, when couples reunite, their ability to empathize with what they've been through. Because they're often, people can be somewhat self-involved and self-reflective and consider what they've been through and fail to consider what the other person has been through. So for the person who left to know what it was like for the person they left behind.
Yes.
For the person who was left behind to know what their life was like struggling here, because they can't imagine, they've never been here before. They don't know what life entails, what it's like, the struggles. So they come here thinking that life was probably wonderful without them,
Right.
and then they find out that life was perhaps much more difficult than they had imagined. And the need for empathy for each other in that experience.
Yes. Yes.
Because they can get lost. If they fail to have empathy, it's disconnecting. It's the
Yes.
failure to create more intimacy. It's the disconnect
Yes.
that occurs.
So thank you so much for sharing all of these thoughts with us and your experience. And if you just very briefly, one last thing that you would like to say before we say goodbye.
Well, I've enjoyed working here out in the East End. I've been exposed to, first of all, different group of Latinos than the ones that lived in the city.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure working with them. I've grown so much. And it really helped me to write this book. The experiences I had with them and the techniques that I developed working with them was instrumental. And without them, this book would have never gotten written.
Oh, yes. Well, it's wonderful. And we have such a strong, resilient, and amazing and creative community out here of Latinos. So, yeah, I'm glad you're a part of them.
Well, thank you
So,
for
again,
having me.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rene Vasquez del Valle, author of Head, Heart, Crotch Connections, How Not to Fail in Search of Your Perfect Union. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.